Hello everyone, I've been putting together a series of bases for my Lord of the Rings figures. Now I don't pretend to be an expert miniatures painter, but I do enjoy making scenery, especially little pieces like this. So if you're better at painting minis than I am, but you want to have a go at basing them too, sit back and enjoy this, and I'll show you how to make a really nice ruin. For this piece I again used the Hot Wire Foam Factory 16-inch Pro table, and I wanted to cut some discs out of the foam, and what they do, they supply you a little plinth to put the foam on, and you put a nail in through the bottom, which they also supply, and then it allows you, once you've set the straight edge in place there and firmly locked it in place, it allows you to rotate the foam around that pivot point and create a perfect circle. This isn't perfect because to be honest, I rushed it a little bit, but after that I've put together 3, as you can see, so 2 more circles, and then I just shaved the edge off so I've got a straight edge, because that will be where the front of the ruin is. It's not completely necessary at this point, but I wanted to do that because I like using the hot wire table. And now again I just set the pivot slightly differently, and I can cut a smaller circle within the original piece, and that leaves me with a nice kind of archway here. And I'm using the Hot Wire Foam Factory's Foam Fusion, which is like a white glue specially formulated for foam, really welds it together nicely, and I stick all the little pieces I've made together. And there I also made a smaller arch, which will actually be an arch rather than the walls of the ruin, and I complete the ruin height basically with another piece stuck on top there. You can see I put this slightly offset it. I was experimenting at this point. I didn't really know how I wanted the thing to turn out, but oh look, there's another piece. I've forgotten that. I actually made 4 pieces. I only showed 3 originally. And then I start using a scalpel to shave it into the right shape I wanted, and it was at this point that I realised I didn't really want massive overhangs, etc. So I used some of those offcuts and I just made little kind of pillars to show where bits of the wall had perhaps crumbled away. So I had an overhang there, but then I could also make a little window in the side just about the right height. I wasn't really going for accuracy of scale here, to be honest. I just go by feel, I always do. I never really go by scale. And I set it on a plinth which is made out of an MDF routed plinth and a piece of extruded foam, and I carried on shaving bits off my ruin shape until I was basically happy with the general shape of things. I cut a little bit out of the top there. I just wanted to give the really kind of crumbling look to the piece, and obviously I then decided to cut away more of that overhang, and now I used some green stuff, which is an epoxy putty. You can wear gloves if you wish to do this. I would recommend wearing gloves, though I don't, because I'm not allergic to epoxy, and I don't use it enough to get exposed totally to it, but you can develop and kind of an allergy to it, so do use gloves. I then used some rolling pins. These are textured rolling pins by Green Stuff World, and I used some water just to make sure it didn't stick to the mat, and while it was still in its case I rolled the pin over the green stuff to flatten it out, and then I dipped the pin itself, which is an acrylic pin with a texture on it. This is a brick texture, over the green stuff. Now, in a previous video, which I actually shot after this one, you saw me using some silicone spray. If I was going to do this again, I would definitely use the silicone spray, because it is a nightmare trying to get this stuff off sometimes. You're using it on something like Milliput's almost impossible. Green stuff is much more rubbery, so it's a really good product to use in this case. I cut it down to size, and I always keep the little bits as well. I just wanted a basic kind of square edge, a right angled edge, because I'm going to be wrapping this around my ruin. And this brick pattern is much better than I could ever carve into bricks. Well, if I had lots of time I would do that, but to be honest, this makes such realistic looking pattern, and it also gives such a durable coat to the foam and covers up those lines so nicely. It means you don't have to then use loads of texture paints all over it. So I just blend other pieces in where I had to add another piece in an offcut to make up the gap on the edge of the ruin there. I blend it in with the edge of my knife, cutting away any excess pieces. And you can also cut in the kind of lines in the brick. And then for the main archway I used another piece of green stuff, and I actually carved in myself the keystone lines in there with my scalpel. Now this, as I say, does stay rubbery for quite some time, giving you quite a good working time to be able to do this. And if you get it wrong, you can just smooth it over with your finger with a little bit of effort and then carry on. And then I applied another piece of the stuff to the inside. As you can see, I've also left a little lip there. Well, that wasn't deliberate at first because the pieces of foam I cut were different widths, but then I thought, well, actually I can make that where a floor used to be perhaps. And now I'm using their set pavement roller to create, you guessed it, a bit of pavement for outside, and again just little bits because I wanted it to look quite crumbly. So I cut it into sections, and I make sure I put a bit on the inside of the ruin walls as well, and then I start applying little bits of extruded foam onto the inside and outside on the floor, and kind of on the ruined bit of the walls where it's crumbled away. And also there you can see where the old floor was to represent bricks. And I'm using some texture paste. This is rough pumice by Vallejo. This just fills in gaps. It also provides a little bit of texture to the stone. I don't go over the whole thing, just very lightly. Then over the ground with some Vallejo European thick mud. And then I paint the entire piece in black gesso, which just it gives the paint that you're going to paint over the top of this a bit of a keyed surface to go over, and it gives it a nice consistent base as well. So now I'm using some acrylic paints. It's just for kind of pastel-y colours. It's got some umbers, some little bit of green and blue and yellow ochre in there, and I just very roughly go over this, and it may look an absolute disaster at the moment. But you wait and see what happens when you apply this Vallejo Game Wash black. I mean, you could use any black wash really. You could use that Noch by Citadel, but this is a bit darker, which is what I wanted. And you go over the entire piece. I was going over in sections here because I was experimenting as I went along, but as I kind of went on I realised I could go over it all. And it really blends those colours underneath, as you can see there, really nicely, and gives a really nice old weathered stone look. When it dries a little bit dark, as you can see there, so I dry brush the edges of the brick with some kind of silvery grey, just making sure that I only pick up the edges of the brick or any raised surfaces. If you go over a bit heavy, just wipe it away with your thumb. And I also, because this is very old ruin, I wanted kind of a look of moss or lichen, so I used some green weathering powder. Now I always begin a little bit light with this, and then I end up getting a lot heavier as I go on, because you're always a little bit wary at the beginning of using these weathering powders because they can dominate and the pigment is so strong. But you can see there I ended up thinking, well, actually it can be greener, give me more green. And our diorama precipe, I don't know, I need to be corrected on that. Now I forgot to show you how I attached these vines, as I say here. Basically I used white glue, patience, my hands and eyes, because it is quite fiddly. And then because I'd used the white glue, it's actually Mod Podge matte, it still leaves a little bit of a sheen, so I decided to go over that with a bit of rust and dark coloured weathering powders. and also lends a little bit of shadow to the pieces. And then to fix all of that on, including the weathering powders, I give it a spray with matte sealing spray. Now these diorama precipice, again, kind of flowering climbers, they are absolutely beautiful. Each one's an individual little flower. Absolutely wonderful, beautiful, realistic little pieces. It makes you feel like you're actually putting a piece of nature on, which you are really, because I think most of them are natural materials which she stabilises. And these are attached in the same way. So if you want to know how I applied the vines, this was how I applied the vines. And now some Noch matting. This is actually from Guagemaster in the UK, but it's made by Noch, and it's 12mm. Kind of a medium green blend. I've forgotten, I've long since lost the packet. And you just press it down. It's not self-adhesive, whereas these are self-adhesive, so you don't need to glue these, whereas you need to glue the matting, and the matting can be torn easily. These are by WWS, it's War World Scenics, and they were very kind and sent me these pieces, much as Diorama Precipice sent me these scenics as well. And these are some of their tall kind of reedy grasses, which are wonderful again, and I just put those around the base, as if, you know, it's just growing up the walls there from over the years. Now, as I say, this was a base I made for a Lord of the Rings figure. In this case it's Farimir, because I imagine this piece to be a kind of ruined tower in Ithilien or something. I was very happy with how it turned out. It wasn't a particularly ambitious piece, but some of the best pieces you make often aren't, because you can really concentrate on all the details. It's like making a meal really. If you're going to make a simple meal, then the flavours have to be just right, and I think this kind of showcases that. I was very happy with the rolling pin texture from Green Stuff World, and of course the scenics from Diorama Precipice, WWS and Noch. I really hope this has helped you out with any basing projects you might have. As I say, I'm sure you're better at painting minis than I am, but it's just good fun to make the bases anyway, and that's the bit that I enjoy the most. Thank you ever so much. If you want to see more, please do check out my Patreon feed. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.